Um, so sometimes, yeah, if we have two cameras, we like do that, then you can match it up a little easier. Looking at the decibel. But okay, yeah. So I don't know. Pretty much, if y'all just want to give an overview of East Atlanta Cop Watch and like how it came to be, and why you're involved, and we can just go from there. We can ask questions if if it ever stops. But
okay, Cop Watch actually was an idea that we had when we first moved into this house because we were concerned about our role in gentrifying the neighborhood as white people moving into a mostly black neighborhood that's gentrifying anyway. We were concerned that we might be hastening that process by making other white people feel more comfortable in the neighborhood, and generally just making the neighborhood a easier place for white folks to come and want to be. So we thought about the forces behind gentrification and began to realize that the police are a really important part of driving poor people of color out of a neighborhood that's contested, driving poor people out of a neighborhood that white people want, and white people want poor people to be moved out of. So how do the cops help gentrify a neighborhood? Well, they make it harder for poor people of color to live there. Maybe they stop people for just walking home from the MARTA station, or harass them in their homes, harass them near their homes, arrest their family members. And we started hearing stories. We started hearing stories from people in our neighborhood about the routine amount of massive harassment that was going on by the cops, and the fear that people felt of the cops in our neighborhood. And we started asking around about who would be interested in helping out with Cop Watch and starting up a chapter, and who would be interested in having it be there. And we got a uniformly positive response, a huge amount of positivity. So we thought that might be a good way to start fighting gentrification.
We also, at the time that we were starting to kind of kick around the idea of filming the cops, there was a lot of buzz and attention around the Red Dog unit, which is here in Atlanta. It's sort of like it's like a SWAT team / vice squad thing. They do a tremendous amount of drug raids. They're notorious for being like even unusually brutal for cops, and they had just been kind of caught out for doing this aggressive raid on a gay bar in town called the Atlanta Eagle, and there was a big fuss about it, and lots of people from like the LGBTQ community were super pissed, and were starting to realize maybe the cops aren't on our side, and we were talking with folks in that direction also, of like being upset about this is one thing, but figuring out ways to actually stop it, to combat these processes, is something that we need to look at.
yes.
What tools did you guys have to initially get started?
It doesn't take that much tools to get started. The main thing that we needed was advice from other people who'd done Cop Watch, because we were justifiably frightened of the backlash that we would see from cops. So what we did was call around to different chapters. A lot of folks on the West Coast were kind enough to meet with us over the phone and have conference calls and give us a bunch of advice. A friend of ours who had done Cop Watch in New York gave us a bunch of advice for how to get started. But as far as materials, really all you need is cameras and cell phones.
Why do each of y'all think it's important personally to be involved with this?
I've worked on a lot of different radical activist political projects throughout my life, even before I started doing Cop Watch specifically. As being an anarchist myself, I've always thought of direct action as a really important part of engaging with the political process and engaging with society in general. When we see problems in society, it's not enough to ask somebody else to fix it for us. We need to look at ways to concretely solve those problems directly ourselves, and to give other people who are facing those problems the tools that they need to solve those problems themselves, rather than looking to politicians or companies or institutions in general to fix these things for us. And Copwatch really does that in so many ways. There's kind of this like political recognition of a problem, but then there's also an incredibly pragmatic way of confronting it. Go out there on the street, find the cops that are doing these things to people, and make it harder for them to do it. And you can see that it works because you see the results when you're on the street.
Yeah, Copwatch was like a really big like introductory project for me, like as an activist, because like as soon as I started, like even just like protesting, like and like seeing directly for like the first time in my life because of like my privilege, like how police operate and how police use violence to suppress movements and stuff, but also poor people of color, that I felt like it was like really, really important to directly like face them like as an oppressive force and to do something, as Marlon was saying, like directly to confront that.
Cool.
Have you guys found it safer for yourself compared to others in the neighborhood because of perhaps racial elements of the police being less likely to attack white people as opposed to black people, Hispanic people?
I think it's pretty clear that it's safer for white folks to stand up to the cops, including doing cop watch. We've seen time and time again in cop watching and in protests how one black protester will be pulled out of a crowd of white people and harassed or arrested. And I think that a lot of people of color that I've talked to have expressed concern that they'd be more likely to be targeted if they were to do cop watch, and I think that's a really valid concern. But I hope that cop watch isn't something that is just limited to white people to be able to do, because that would make it too narrow of a scope. That would make it not that useful as a tool for communities to protect themselves.
Yeah. I think that it's not like the racial element is there, but really what it comes down to, I think, is that police abuse and target the people that they feel they can get away with abusing and targeting. And they often make the assumption like, oh, if you're Latino, then I can beat you up and you can't do anything about it. And part of the reason that they don't make that assumption about us is because we're young and we're white, but also because we demonstrate that we know what we're doing. We give, we have uniforms, we have organized teams, we know our shit, and we don't let them, get us off track. And we know legal experts, which lends us some confidence just internally that we know that if the cops try anything, we will be able to follow up on that. They won't be able to get away with it as easily as they would with someone else. So I think those kinds of things can be developed in lots of communities. The trick is just making that happen so that other people feel the same way that we do when we go out there and face the cops.
Yeah. And not to mention, like, knowing Copwatch's history and stuff, like, as an organization, it was started by the Panthers in New York and stuff, and yeah.
In Oakland.
In Oakland, excuse me.
Yeah.
In addition to hitting the streets, what other services has you guys provided as Copwatch?
We give trainings on what your rights are, and we train other folks to do cop watch the way that we do it. We have a cell phone, so folks can call if they've been abused by the cops, if there's any way that we can help them or they'd like us to help them. We'll talk to you and try to do whatever we can. We can file complaints with the police department or with independent review boards. We can get you in touch with people that we know. And we'll put in effort to help you if you've been abused by the cops. No promises that we're going to be able to necessarily get justice, but we'll do our best. We're
Learning more about the open records process, the abilities for civilians to get documents from the police department or the government in general, which is interesting because it's something that you don't have to be a legal expert to do, but you can learn pretty interesting things just by figuring out the specifics of how to use that process. That's something that I would recommend for other people who are dealing with police corruption to learn a little about, because it can be a valuable tool.
East Atlanta Cop Watch has had, East Atlanta Cop Watch has had some success in affecting policy or changing policy within the Atlanta Police Department. I was wondering if one of you guys could go a little into that.
Yeah, so fairly early on in our project, before we had really established the reputation of that we knew what we were doing and that we were not to be messed with, we were in a little 5 Points neighborhood, which is kind of just up the street from here. We see some cops. They're raiding, I guess it's like a head shop type place. They pull a guy out in handcuffs, and there's a bunch of cops, like plainclothes cops wearing these police vests. And so I had a camera, phone, and I just start filming the cops. They tell me I can't. I continue to film them. They come and like physically mess with my camera. I, bring it back up and keep filming them, and they proceed to like grab me physically and wrench it out of my hand and confiscate it. And at that time, we didn't have a lot of the procedures that we have in place now, so we did not have another camera rolling at the time, which we thought was bad news. I thought that maybe we had just kind of gotten owned by the cops. But it turned out that later I acquired the phone number of the cop who had seized the phone from the evidence department, called him up and recorded a call of him essentially confessing to the fact that he seized my phone because I was recording them, and that he would give it back to me, but only if I would assist him in deleting the footage off of the phone. So with that, we were able to go to a civil liberties lawyer who, surprisingly to me, was completely eager to take the case. We didn't really even ask him. We called him up to ask advice, and he was like, I will represent you, let's do this. Filed a lawsuit. The Atlanta Police Department was forced to settle by paying us $40,000 and amending their standard operating procedures, which is the police manual of rules that they must follow, to say officers are not to interfere with the public's right to record them. And we actually have another friend who was arrested in a similar case for taking pictures of a man being beat up outside her house. And she followed a similar trajectory, and her case was settled after ours. And her settlement required the police to strengthen that that rule. So now the rule is not only are officers not to interfere with the public's right to record, but violation of this procedure is a code D, I think, which means dismissal violation, which means that the officer must be fired if they break this rule. And if the department does not fire the officer, there's a federal judge somewhere who will hold the chief of police in contempt of court for not abiding by the order. So there's pretty strong procedural protections and quasi-legal protections in place in the city of Atlanta for people who want to film the cops. Making sure that you are in a position to take advantage of those protections takes some preparation and takes some knowledge, but they're there. You absolutely can do it.